Good morning, Minister Lee.
Morning.
Thank you very much for taking the time for this interview today. I really appreciate it. Glyph itself, we are a social enterprise. We have been working the ground itself. We have been in daily engagement with the people, with the various constituencies. I think we want to be able to surface more issues which are currently on the ground upwards, and hopefully perhaps to get your thoughts on some of the issues which a lot of Singaporeans have been grappling with.
Not right? Upwards, but across.
Across. I mean, Singapore itself stands a very unique challenge. I mean, we are a very diverse nation, right? Multinationally, multi-races, and that applies for our family, and I think that's great. But during this time, diversity challenges also have been quite a struggle, especially for families who, let's say, they might not have both parents who are Singaporeans, which means this kind of disadvantage them during this period of time when there are a lot of aid assistance programs being doled out, trying to help Singaporean citizens, and I think that's very fair itself. But for such families where, just because a certain parent is not a Singaporean, but the kids are actually studying in Singapore, growing up in Singapore, do you think that, are there any such assistance schemes, or can we actually target this segment better when we do see a huge population of them living in rental flats actually?
So many of the schemes, especially the broader ones, support Singaporeans and PRs. People who have got certain residency status, but we acknowledge that there are lower income households who are transnational in nature and may need a lot more support. And so in a sense, you have broad schemes with certain criteria, and in those you have certain amount of discretion to render more support. The financial social safety net of ComCare, short and medium term assistance, allows the social service office, the SSO, together with the family service centres, to look into specific circumstances of the family. So it's not just a broad application of a scheme to a family and then you qualify or you don't. Okay. But ComCare allows us to look into the specific needs of the family, whether basic needs are met, and over and beyond that, given the information that we are aware of, being able to pull in support from other agencies as well as other organizations. Okay. Yeah, so that provides that opportunity for us to look at what the family specifically needs, where the gaps are, and of course also looking at what assets the family has, right, in order to help themselves. Very important.
On that note, in terms of the financial assistance itself, right, I guess there's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk about eligibility criteria, how some families are still struggling on that process. And I think with all fairness to the government, at this point in time, you're going to see a huge ramp up, in applications, no doubt about it. Are there steps being taken to actually increase the kind of manpower which, backlog is definitely piling, right? And are there steps taken to increase the manpower, people to on the ground being able to just assess and so forth, and where applications don't just be stuck in limbo where families are stuck wondering when is my ComCare going to be dispersed and so forth? Is aid coming to us itself? How is this whole process actually being?
So this pandemic will have a long tail, and for many months, maybe even years to come, you'll feel the economic backlash, and it will be very real on the ground. It's not just a GDP figure, it's not just green or red, it's really about jobs, it's about livelihoods, it's about people's lives. And the lower income and the vulnerable have been and will be hit very hard.
They have been.
But also middle income households who have ordinarily been doing okay, managing, suddenly beset with crisis, and then it will spiral into a financial crisis, and then it will start to play out in terms of family stress, strain, mental distress, family issues, and it will cascade. And so, all in, what this crisis will create is a growing social need, financial need, need for jobs and fulfillment, need for family services and intervention, need for psychological support and help. So it's really multifaceted. It's a social crisis created by a very, very major economic challenge. And you're quite right that we not only need to have more schemes and support, and government has poured in a lot of resources, and Singaporeans have been very generous, both corporate Singapore as well as ordinary Singaporeans from all walks of life have been very generous in giving. But we need to make sure that the support is available to people who need it. So for example, in the month of April, we gave to 450,000 Singaporeans a temporary relief fund. It's a small sum, It helps them meet their immediate needs, get through the month, and then other schemes come in with a slightly longer horizon. But processing them, ensuring that we take into account specific circumstances, processing appeals is not trivial. You can have a scheme, you can have lots of resources, but how do you ensure the last mile delivery is met? And so we've ramped up manpower in our SSOs very significantly. We're working with the NCSS and our family service centres and other government-funded services run by SSAs and VWOs to increase their manpower, social workers, auxiliary officers and staff, people to help with safe management so that the social workers focus. Creates job opportunities for things that we do need to do, but also ensuring that we shepherd and make good use of these resources.
Sure.
Because today we're talking about the here and now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But imagine we have a conversation a year from now. I'm
Things are
quite
gonna be
sure
different.
things will be very different.
Exactly.
And we may look back to this conversation and say, did we or did we not head in the right direction in being good custodians for resources?
Exactly.
Both government
A
resources.
huge budget has been put out really.
Absolutely, as well as a philanthropic dollar. How do we maximize it to benefit people and benefit larger numbers of people?
It has always been a struggle for Singapore itself, right? We do see a widening income gap in that sense, where a lot of Singaporeans itself, they do not necessarily feel like things have really progressed for them. The social mobility seems to be lacking somewhat. If I could just point out a reference back then, Minister Chan Chun Sing once said that this government will always have your back. General sentiments on the ground itself might not necessarily reflect that. Would you like to comment perhaps to how we could actually improve social mobility, let's say for Singaporeans who are within the lower middle income segment, where they are just more vulnerable, to external circumstances that could actually impact their life?
Tackling inequality is a work that never ends.
Sure.
And as societies mature and economies mature, both in Singapore and the rest of the world, and there's no reason to believe Singapore will naturally, if you leave things be, take a different trajectory from other societies. Right? There's a natural evolution to societies. Inequality will become a more difficult problem as societies and economies mature. Look at Singapore and rewind to even in the, say, 50s and 60s. Many people were poor, bar a few tycoons who made it big. And with broad-based support, government using its scarce resources back then to provide basic housing, basic healthcare, basic education, as well as bringing in investments and jobs, creating jobs. That enabled many Singaporeans, especially the children of first-generation Singaporeans and migrants, to seize opportunities and progress. So you provide this across the board. And for a whole population, the vast majority of whom lower income, poor, many were lifted up. Right? So the idea that rising tides lift many boats, but not all boats. There'll be some who couldn't seize the opportunity. So if you have a large family, elderly parents, but with many children, often you hear stories, I think, of your parents or grandparents who say, the older ones will not, they will sacrifice, and the youngest one will go to university or get opportunity.
Exactly. My mom came out to work for the family as well.
So that the younger siblings get the chance.
Yeah, that's
right. So there will be some who will not be able to seize the opportunity because they sacrifice. Right? But then their children, right, if their families are stable, should be able to do relatively well with those broad-based opportunities. But as people on their own merit, with broad-based support, do better in life, there will be people who are left behind. Often because they are beset by some issues that afflict them, and if you're not careful, will afflict subsequent generations, especially if it's a complex problem. Right? And over the years, you've seen government tilting more support in favour of the lower income and vulnerable. So not only do you have universal subsidies for housing, healthcare, education, right? But you also have schemes that are tilted in favour of them, often means tested. So You get subsidies for education like everyone else. But if you come from a family with less means, a lot more support for you, more bursaries, more support in preschool, also in the national school system and beyond. But even then, it will allow more of these low-income families to do better. But as I said earlier in the discussion with you, there will be some families with such a vast array of complex issues. It could be medical issues, it could be disability, it could be mental health, it could be spousal violence, it could be
dysfunctional families,
it could be addictions, a whole array of issues that can hold back generation after generation. It's very vicious kind of anchor.
So is it because the broad-based support approach is not as not as efficient?
So you still need the broad-based support and support tilted in favor of the lower income. But what I'm saying is that, like Comlink, like the SG Care Community Network, like Uplift, like Kickstart, the next revolution or transformation of our social safety nets involves, for this smaller segment of very vulnerable families with complex needs and their children and their grandchildren, a kind of partnership that enables us to get a deeper understanding of what holds them down, the kinds of assets that they have to overcome some of their obstacles, but then being able to marshal the resources from the government, from the ground-up groups, from the social enterprises, to address these issues one after another, to unshackle these bonds. I think that is much needed to ensure that for these families who are fewer and fewer in number, but whom if you don't take care, will exacerbate the inequalities in society and weigh on the conscience of all Singaporeans across the board, including those who have done well. And for people like you and others who have done well in life, to pay it forward, like all of us, and get involved, not just by doing more, but by doing more better. My case to you is that platforms that bear the DNA of social service integration, where we cast our individual organizations' interests aside and work collectively, sharing information, partnering each other, building through the intermediation of an individual who has a good relationship with the family, to be able to more deeply understand, feel, and work with them to tackle the challenges. And I think that will, in my view, help them, if not their children, to progress. They think about lending a helping hand to other people. I think we can really make a difference. I have a young man I met a couple of months ago, and he was helping out outside the wet market. He was helping to manage the crowds to ensure that safe distancing is in place, but then that the patrons of the market, many of whom are elderly, as well as the stall holders, are kept safe. I talked to him and he was volunteering day after day, and he himself is in serious difficulty because his industry is severely impacted. But he says, I have some savings and I've got government support. It's a bit hard to get a full-time job, but I'm working nights. In the daytime, I want to take my mind off my troubles. And I'm here to volunteer. And Mr. Lee, if I can do more, I'll do more.
It's the work ethics that define him.
It's moving. It's not that he's well-to-do. He is himself struggling. He's lost the job. He's had to struggle to find new ones that require him to work late at night. But he looks after his family and he says, I'll take my mind off these troubles. There are people out there who are suffering more than I. And he's actually actively volunteering. I think that kind of spirit says a lot about Singaporeans.
Wanting to be self-sufficient, wanting to help others itself, wanting to do better for yourself so that you can be in a position to better help others. I think that's got to be.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you very much, Minister Lee. Thank you for your
pleasure.
time today. It was a pleasure hosting you, and thank you for supporting Glyph.
Pleasure's mine.